You can really love something, but you can still have a lot of problems with it. Be they subjective or objective, micro or macro. So here's one author's fan-driven look at an interactive sci-fi epic that is part of many people's gaming life. Hello and welcome to this episode of Author Talks. I'm Thomas Wrightson, an author whose work currently consists of one in-progress sci-fi space opera series and one in-production radio drama. See where I'm going with this? I'm going to talk about a story and series that formed part of my cultural background during my teenage and early adult years, and influenced my writing for the Cluster Cycle in some ways, I won't deny it. That series is Mass Effect, developed by BioWare and published by Electronic Arts. This episode is releasing close to N7 Day, when Mass Effect will be on a lot of people's minds, even if what comes is non-news. I've played the original trilogy and Andromeda, and I enjoy them. As sci-fi fluff, basically the equivalent of dipping into a Dan Brown when I need something non-challenging. But I decided, what the heck, I'm going to look at them through my authorial eyes and see what I like about each instalment and what I feel doesn't work. Being a writer means I can tend to be more or less critical of things compared to others who play the games or watch the cutscenes or find those special compilation videos of different original or modded romances. Guilty as charged. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about the games in full, so there will be spoilers. And furthermore, I'm basing my observations on the experience I had with the Legendary Edition release of the Mass Effect trilogy and the latest patch version of Andromeda. So, without further ado, let's begin at the beginning. The original Mass Effect released in 2007. Set in a future where humans have discovered a form of interstellar travel enabled by the titular phenomenon, they have become part of a larger galactic community alongside multiple alien species: Asari, Turians, Salarians, Krogan, Quarians, Batarians, Hanar, Rachni, and others yet to be introduced. All of these communities got their technological breakthroughs from remnants of the Protheans, an ancient species that vanished 50,000 years ago. Our lead, the human Commander Shepard, is pulled into a conspiracy relating to a synthetic species called the Geth and their commander, the rogue agent Saren, and uncovers a deeper mystery surrounding the Reapers, beings said to have wiped out the Protheans as part of a cyclical pattern of galactic extinction. The story is okay. Better than okay in some regards, as it introduces some compelling mysteries and does something that sci-fi is inherently good at, blending elements of action with genuinely unsettling horror. Many of the side missions, while having little narrative, make up for it with deeply chilling atmospheres. Dead bodies, abandoned labs, eerily quiet mines, infested bases. There's also a ton of background lore on some of the conflicts and skirmishes that exist and lend background context to this universe. The Rachni Wars, the Krogan Rebellions, the First Contact War between humanity and the Turians, the constant troubles with the Batarians, and the delicate power balance between the different peoples that form part of the system's alliance. The cast is also okay. Definite strengths and weaknesses to be found, with some getting a lot of focus compared to others. The standouts are the Asari, Liara Tassoni, who is a mandatory character throughout the trilogy, and Urdnot Rex, here in part as a cipher for one of the long-running story threads, an artificial virus introduced to his species to halt the Krogan rebellions. I like Liara and Rex a lot. Liara is just a charming, socially awkward geek who loves her role studying Protheans, while Rex is a young, for a Krogan, warrior grown old before his time. The skirting legality Turian officer Garrus Vakarian and streetwise Quarian pilgrim Talizora are interesting additions, but serve more as plot vehicles and have precious little active story content. The two humans, Kaidan and Ashley, are pretty bare bones throughout the trilogy, and especially here. But Kaidan is the better of the two in my eyes for facing up against an alien's abusive actions while not losing himself to hatred and prejudice. Ashley appears to have ingrained xenophobia on principle and has a very petty "my family's doomed because of literal sins of the father" narrative. I mean, just don't go into the military, make your life somewhere else. There is some unintentional comedy in how willing Caden is to fall in love with a female shepherd, but maybe that's a sign of his personal trauma showing. And Ashley does soften a little, I think. She remains very standoffish and insular. Where the characters are brought into focus, in a good way, at least with Rex and the humans, is during a mission on the planet Vermeer, where main antagonist Saren has suborned Krogan allies with the promise of a cure for their disease. Depending on your actions and relationship strength, Rex can live or die here, and whatever choice you make, one of the humans will be sacrificed. This may seem pretty standard now, but this kind of choice, which carried forward into later games, was innovative at the time. This is when we must also talk choices. A key selling point of BioWare's games is the narrative choices and the breadth of options therein. For its time, Mass Effect has an impressive roster of choices, not all exclusive to cutscenes. Which of your human companions do you sacrifice? Do you save or destroy the last Rachni Queen on Novaria? Do you help the Solarian soldier Kirihi survive Vermeer? How many of Zoo's Hope's colonists will you save on Ferron? Will you use violence or subterfuge to reach Ilos? Many choices are tied to a morality mechanic, its two sides dubbed Paragon and Renegade. Personally, I don't like binary morality systems in fiction, although future games would balance it out to be less about morality and more about attitude. Though there are some side quests, like the Number 1 Fan, where Renegade is the objectively correct concluding choice. I will not be accepting criticism on this opinion. Mass Effect also has two choices that should have repercussions down the line, one of which I have feelings on. The first is whether to save or sacrifice the Systems Alliance Council representing the three main species during an attack by the Geth. This isn't a huge thing, to be honest, so I won't dwell on it. And they remain very stubborn and awkward regardless, a very substandard constant annoyance for players. The second choice is who will serve as humanity's representative on the Council at the story's end, the military man Anderson or the politician Udina. This is a choice which should similarly have consequences, but doesn't. We'll get back to this later on. So, in my opinion, I think Mass Effect is a very strong starting point, and in some ways a good story in its own right. It has a strong blending of grand space opera and sci-fi horror, and some humour if you know where to look. Even if it falls into too many military sci-fi tropes for my liking, unless you do what I did and head for a combination of Renegade and Paragon choices, it's still pressed enough of my buttons that I think of it fondly. Releasing 3 years later in 2010, Mass Effect 2 takes everything that was done in the original and gives it the Dirty Dozen treatment. No, I'm serious, that was one of the developers' inspirations. Initially killed in an attack by aliens dubbed the Collectors, Shepard is resurrected and recruited by Cerberus, a human-centric paramilitary splinter group, to gather a team mostly from the morally grey areas of the galaxy and stop the Collectors from attacking human colonies. Compared to the original, Mass Effect 2 is extremely character-driven. If you boiled down all the main events of the plot, not counting recruitment and DLC, it's literally 5 shortish missions tops. And it's actually far simpler than the original. There's no real mystery at play, only an oft-repeated mission to stop the Collectors in a potentially one-way trip. The meat of the story is with loyalty missions, where you help one of your squad sort out some personal issue. It makes Mass Effect 2 a beloved classic, and remains most fans' favourite. Due to its inspirations, the tone of the story is much, much darker. This is reflected in the character mannerisms and a far more overt use of horror in some of its aspects, such as the origins of the Collectors and what they do to human captives. It also shows in how the Paragon and Renegade choice system has been rebalanced, so you can still go with Renegade options but pick a correct, aka clever or peaceful, resolution to situations in most cases. It means that you can trigger some cool set-piece moments during the interactive cutscene stretches, which allow your Shepard to show far more personality than otherwise possible. Also, small tangent here. When I'm talking about Shepard, I'm almost always thinking of the female option voiced by Jennifer Hale, in my mind the definitive version. While I'm sure Mark Mear's performance has its fans and good points, the delivery is so uniformly flat that it turns me off playing through the game as a male Shepard. I've heard him in other roles and he can be more emotive, so I'm chalking this up to voice direction, or difficulty with the cold reading that was required due to how the scripts were kept secret until the last possible moment. There is something I would criticise about its structure. While Mass Effect felt like a grand and sweeping epic mystery and had an overall consistency with its tone outside of some side quests, Mass Effect 2 feels like a narrative anthology about this one group of characters. Because of this, there is a lot more variety in the adventures we see, but the tone of these adventures bounces all over the place. The stories range from cute and funny, like the Krogan Grunt's rite of passage or helping Kasumi Goto with a heist, to profound and confrontational, like Solarian scientist Mordin Solus facing the plight of the Krogan, or the almost paired missions of Tali and the Geth Unit Legion. Family matters are brought up a lot, with Miranda Lawson, Jacob Taylor, the Drell assassin Thane, and Asari knight-errant cum samurai mixture Samara all needing help with various family matters, which range from sweet to rather disturbing. Giving Garrus and former Cerberus prisoner / test subject Jack personal closure is genuinely engaging, and there's Saeed Masani's boring as plain bread revenge mission, I guess. This doesn't sound too bad, but for the unprepared it creates pretty bad tonal whiplash. For instance, without foreknowledge, you could end up going from exploring the decade-long misconduct on Aya with Jacob, to helping our adolescent tank-bred grunt on Tuchanka. It can be a little disorienting, and that's not counting the DLC missions. There are stark contrasts between the light-hearted banter and action of Liara's quest against the Shadow Broker, the problematic horror show that is Overlord, and the moral minefield of Arrival. It can undermine the characters, especially when you reach content that was written without them in mind. Don't get me wrong, they're not bad, the writing is more than solid, but it can feel like switching channels between a more serious episode of Star Trek or Doctor Who and a lighter episode of Black Mirror or Dark. Because of this, I can't agree with people who laud this story to the skies and insist it's the best. Is it well written? Yes, undeniably, it's some of the best video game writing out there, and indeed some of the best writing unqualified. Most of the characters in themselves are a joy, both your main party and side characters like Arya T'Loak and the Elusive Man. But with a weak central plot and character stories inducing near constant tonal whiplash, it doesn't feel like the adventure I was wanting. It doesn't help that aspects of its ending and one of its hinted plot threads were leading in directions that got dropped during the next game's production. In contrast, there are some nice callbacks and Easter eggs for imported save files, and once again the side quests add a lot of humour, such as kicking the #1 fan right in the quads, again always the correct option. So Mass Effect 2 is good, but it's not a true favourite. Mass Effect 3 launched in 2012 and was beset by troubles. Due to a tight production deadline and repeated redrafting of its narrative, including a mid-production rewrite following a script leak, its release version was a mess and needed some post-release adjustments. The story places full focus on the Reapers as they have arrived in strength to cleanse the galaxy of spacefaring life. Shepard must rally all forces in a desperate final gamble, combating both Reaper interference and traitorous factions within humanity led by the remnants of Cerberus. The tone here is grim, but not fatalistic. While there are continued explorations of the Reaper's uncanny ability to twist life into a grim parody of itself to serve their needs, and the impact of Total War is demonstrated repeatedly through environmental storytelling and near constant in-game dialogue, it's also the most approachable. It's not the slow burn mystery of Mass Effect or the modular, tonally inconsistent ride of Mass Effect 2. There is a strong recurring plot thread of all in this together, putting aside old enmities for the sake of survival, which in turn will leave the survivors irrevocably changed. It also reinforces its militaristic tone to, in my case at least, an uncomfortable degree, and makes the Paragon and Renegade choices a bit more morality based than in Mass Effect 2. Even if you can still pick a Renegade answer and get a good outcome. It's in this game that callbacks and culminations to previous choices are given in massive amounts, with whole side missions changing or not appearing depending on choices you make. You get to influence how long-running plot threads such as the fate of the Krogan or the Quarian-Geth War play out, and a final choice on how to save the galaxy from the Reapers, if you even do that. Some of the emails you get talking about characters you helped or hinted across the series are genuinely moving. There is still a small dose of humour, though it mostly comes through character dialogue, as the side quests also adopt a fairly serious tone. These callbacks and smaller stories are what I really liked about this narrative, and because of this it felt like a true culmination. Although there is one choice that is summarily ignored, and could have been so much fun to explore. By Mass Effect 3, regardless of your choice in the first game, Udina will be on the Council, and Anderson will be on Earth with Shepard when the Reapers attack. By the end of the game, Udina will have betrayed the Council to Cerberus out of fear and greed and been killed for it, while Anderson dies in some manner during a final confrontation with the Reaper-controlled Elusive Man. But as I played through, I kept on asking why they couldn't have kept the player's choice in mind here. Allowing me to theorise for a moment, suppose Udina had been on Earth and Anderson on the Council. There would still be a human traitor on the Council and a human killed by the Elusive Man, but the context could have been different and interesting. Anderson might have betrayed the Council out of desperation to save Earth, in an attempt to gain total control and perhaps exploit Cerberus in a double bluff action to destroy them, all while believing Shepard would be his staunchest ally. By contrast, Udina, with whom Shepard has an antagonistic relationship, would still help organise the resistance on Earth, but in his own way, perhaps focusing on sneak tactics and espionage over raw military might, keeping people alive and resisting until the cavalry arrived. In this scenario, Anderson's betrayal and death would have been a heartbreaking moment, showing the war corrupting even the best among people, while at the end Udina and Shepard could have had a final grudging burying of the hatchet after Udina pulled out all the stops to keep humanity going until Shepard could end it all. There could even have been further involved consequences based on whether Shepard saved or sacrificed the original Council. But no, the story needed an easy antagonist, and in American mainstream military sci-fi, or fiction in general from what I've seen, it seems increasingly anathema to make good soldiers antagonists. Bad apples, go for it, but not people driven by a philosophy of the ends justifying the means, which by the way Anderson and Udina both represent, albeit in selfless and selfish paradigms respectively. So due to this asinine cultural pressure, this choice was rendered pointless. And continuing with characters, this is where we can run into more cases of uneven representation. The established companions are probably the strongest they've been, as they have reached their more rounded and mature state and are fun to be around, although you do need earlier context for full appreciation. Garrus, Liara and Tully return along with your surviving human companion, although out of the two, Kaidan seems to get the more fleshed out portrayal compared to Ashley. Probably just me, but maybe, just maybe, Ashley could have been written to be a bit less of a stubborn xenophobe by this point. Edie, a synthetic intelligence introduced in Mass Effect 2, gets her own body and a character arc about fully exploring her personality and independence. Pretty standard for sci-fi, but her budding relationship with the crew is sweet. New companion James Vega and secondary antagonist Kai Leng suffer greatly from additional media required syndrome. You get a bit of stuff in-game, but without prior knowledge from comics, you wouldn't know what happened with Kai Leng beyond a single email. We don't get the full scope of James's trauma of abandoning his whole team and a colony to the Collectors without watching an animated feature. The Prothean Javik, long story, don't ask, isn't terrible, but he's clearly a DLC character slotted into the main game. Surprisingly, the two side characters, Steve Cortez and Samantha Trainer, are very engaging, especially Samantha if you pursue related side missions. Also, the pilot Joker, who has been with us all along, reaches the climax of his arc after a prolonged and occasionally rocky relationship with Shepard. He's nice, and I like him in this game especially as he lets his mask of forced humour slip, showing his true, burdened self. Then on top of that we get more side content, and it seems to cater for all tastes. We receive information on the origins of the Reapers in Leviathan, which returns to the first game's tone of horror mystery in spectacular fashion. There is by turns unsettling and bombastic Mass Effect 2 style character-driven action when helping Aria retake her colony home in Omega. And there's a strong and not unwelcome focus on comedy hijinks in the Citadel storyline. It can get a bit overwhelming due to just how much content there is, but it feels like a well-earned victory lap for the world and cast. The endings, at least post-extended ending patch, are to my mind sound. I don't envy the writers the task of bringing such a vast narrative to a close, especially as they couldn't realistically account for every single choice. The options we did get were also thematically appropriate. Shepard can abandon all hope and surrender to the cycle's continuation in Refusal, choose humanity first with Destruction, dooming all synthetic life, become the Reaper's ruling intelligence in Control, or sacrifice her essence to merge organic and synthetic life in Synthesis. Out of the endings, I prefer Synthesis and Control, and chose them in that order on my 2 trilogy playthroughs. They seemed the most sci-fi, especially Synthesis, as the galaxy has been irrevocably changed by the war and can't return to its original state. Why not try to make things better, either by bringing ultimate understanding or acting as a caretaker and rebuilder for a new generation? The other 2 endings just feel like restoring a flawed status quo. As you can tell from the sheer number of words dedicated to it, I have thoughts on Mass Effect 3. It does have problems, but not nearly as many as some might say. It's probably a matter of personal taste, like all fiction, and there are some points where the irrelevance of choices, large amount of content, or necessity for outside information hamper the experience. But out of the 3, I enjoyed it the most from a character-based perspective. When I completed that first run and chose Synthesis, uniting the peoples of the Milky Way in a new future free from the Reapers at the cost of Shepard's life, I had genuine tears in my eyes. I was seeing the fruits of my labour with a cast I'd grown to love despite their many, many, many flaws. That's the sign of a story that truly left its mark. Fast forward to 2017 and Mass Effect Andromeda released to tired faces around the world. Okay, leaving aside overused memes, the development of the 4th game was marred from an early stage, and its story is effectively incomplete as planned DLC was cancelled by Electronic Arts after the game was savaged by some vocal players and moderately critiqued by journalists. Also, it didn't sell within their overinflated expectations. Yes, I'm a little bitter. The story, set 6 centuries after the main trilogy, follows a group of Milky Way colonists as they attempt to find a new home within the Heleus cluster in the Andromeda galaxy. What they find is a massive malfunctioning terraforming network, a dark energy mass called the Scourge, and a war between 2 peoples, the Angara and the Ket. As one of the 2 Ryder siblings, given the role of Pathfinder by their father before his death, you must explore the Heleus cluster and discover the secrets behind these strange new things. This story has little connection to the earlier games, although a key side quest reveals the Andromeda expedition was set up to escape from the Reapers, preserve some part of the Milky Way in a place it was assumed was beyond their reach. But there are mysteries here. Mysteries the developers confirmed were not all intended to be resolved. For all its incomplete nature, it wasn't strictly intended to be the start of a trilogy, but a standalone game in its own right. For that reason, I enjoyed it more than I would enjoy the other games in a vacuum. I wasn't sure I would like this story, but I did. It's got issues, and it's incomplete, but it's not bad. It's just aimed at a different audience. The writing is in the modern MCU/Joss Whedon style of not fully taking itself seriously, but it doesn't go completely overboard with winks to the camera or deliberate ignorance of serious story beats. It just makes sure we get plenty of jokes alongside everything else. The side quests also generally have enjoyable little bits of dialogue, even if there is a clear lack of time and budget in how they are presented. The biggest issue is that it feels like it was written in a modular style, either with different writing groups not working together as closely as they should have, or pieces of half-completed projects being stitched together into a single narrative due to time pressure. I present to you the opening, where the human colony ship Hyperion reaches its intended but uninhabitable world and first encounters the Ket. The Ket, which can be summed up as a Roman Empire-inspired organic take on Star Trek's Borg, are repeatedly stated in-game to prefer taking people alive for examination and exaltation. In normal language, torturous experiments to determine strengths and weaknesses, and then taking the idea of positive eugenics to its horrifying logical conclusion by incorporating desirable genetic traits into the rest of the Ket species, and also transforming the donors into new Ket because the Ket can no longer naturally reproduce. But in their first encounter, the Ket show their antagonistic status by shooting first, counter to most of what they otherwise do or are described as doing in story outside of specific defensive combat. To the Ket, dead bodies are a failure because they can't provide information. That's a big problem with the story, but there are other examples of this disjointed modular approach, such as how little actual consequence comes from some of your actions, like resolving or inflating tensions with an exiled Krogan group or getting involved in the power struggle on the planet Kadara. I will say the incidental dialogue and smaller stories make up for that to a point. There are a lot of mini-narratives in Andromeda that flesh out the new setting and characters, which were surprisingly engaging, but they tend to be isolated in small bubbles, obviously cut off from the rest of the narrative. One unqualified positive is that the dialogue you hear between your party members in your ship or runabout is lots of fun, from more serious discussions around things like medical concerns, to two of the non-human crew being hypercritical of the game Snakes and Ladders. Segueing into the cast, again, I've not got many complaints, but nor am I praising them to the high heavens. Scott Ryder, the sibling I played as, has a lot more personality through the voice performance alone than the equivalent male Shepard, and his sister Sarah also feels like an engaging type. It's just they lack some of Shepard's bite. They do get plus points for not being military, so being a lot more free and easy, demonstrated by the Paragon Renegade binary choice mechanic being shot into the sun. The companions are many times stronger than their equivalents in the original Mass Effect, meaning the first game from 2007, but still a bit weaker than the casts from Mass Effect 2 and 3. The humans, Liam and Cora, blow Kaidan and Ashley out of the water in terms of their initial character arcs. Liam doesn't know when to leave well enough alone, and the point of Cora's personal mission is to learn to work without a senior's plan. The Asari PB is a fun time, and while her mannerisms clearly make use of neurodivergent coding, they didn't feel like lip service. The Turian veteran Nyx is one of my favourite character archetypes, the assured and badass fixer who has a softer side and can defend herself. Nakmor Drak is interesting as a character, as he is a Krogan near the end of his life. He has seen the best and worst of his people, and gone through some stuff. Finally, the Angaran Jal Amadarav is an interesting companion to have along, as his society's long-standing war with the Ket has skewed his perspective on some things. I sadly can't give the same praise to the crew of the in-game ship, Gil, Suvi, Lexi and Callow, who feel pretty bland, especially Gil, he just gets on my nerves, and the antagonist Ket Archon. Oh, they could have done so much more. So, from a story perspective, is Andromeda on a par with the original trilogy? No, not really. But I think most people are unfairly critical or hold the trilogy on too high a pedestal. This was a take on the universe by different writers and creative leads, with a new setting and some serious development challenges that could have scuppered the project entirely. In its current state, it's an enjoyable standalone sci-fi romp about finding a new home away from the stifling restrictions of the Milky Way. As long as you approach it with that mindset, it's very enjoyable. I think part of the reason I enjoyed Andromeda more than I expected to is because of how modern it feels compared to the original trilogy. Mass Effect as a franchise is grounded in the classics of sci-fi. Think Philip K. Dick, Arthur C. Clarke, Robert A. Heinlein, Ursula K. Le Guin, Octavia C. Butler, authors who, in their time, created wondrous and terrifying worlds. But you'll notice, out of all those authors, only 2 were women and only 1 not white. And I'm not going to defend parts of their writing that may not have aged well. They were of their time and thus reflect some aspect of their time's attitudes. just like this series reflects mainstream American attitudes in the mid-2000s to early 2010s. Cutting to the chase, while some of the works of these authors challenged sexual and gender norms, sometimes quite blatantly, Mass Effect, for the most part, doesn't. The Mass Effect universe uses a very traditional, and very American/white colonial, social model for its work, military and gender roles, especially in the first two games. Other models are referenced, such as the thinly coded analogy to North Korea or Belarus in the isolated and demonized Batarians, but not focused on. While some of the peoples are interesting to consider, like the role of Solarian Dalatrasses and Krogan sisterhoods, which mirror old systems of women holding positions of power and seniority, or the implied complete meritocracy of the Taurians, most of the species are represented with either men or male-presenting people in positions of authority. On the gender side of things, non-binary and trans characters are conspicuous by their absence, unless you want to read Asari as representing those roles due to being monogendered, in quotes. It could be that this universe's society is advanced enough that people don't bother with that anymore, but I doubt that. If it were, they/them pronouns would be around more, and they're also completely absent. And in an unfortunate archaic touch, male and female are used as nouns more than they should be, rather than adjectives. Even if it's in dialogue and so character-based, it's still not great. By contrast, Andromeda has a cast that's pretty gender-blind in terms of roles, despite still having a dearth of explicit non-binary and trans representation. And whether it's for ease of writing or not, they generally dropped the male-female noun usage, instead opting for any alien terms to be localized for the human leads as man or woman, for the most part. Except with the villains, but I think that helps add to their coding of being real nasty. And I think that leads, kind of, into the romances, which get their own little section as I think they're just okay for the most part. They're usually more than a little corny, and out of the ones I've experienced either at first or second hand, I don't have many favourites. It doesn't help that, in fear of a storm in a teacup backlash similar to the first game, Mass Effect 2 quite deliberately threw most LGBTQ representation to the wall. The two standouts I found outside of Liara's continued romance are the memento of a dead loved one and an implication of forced situational sexuality in a prison environment. So tragic or problematic. Not sending a good message here. From the original trilogy, the space opera-style, story-spanning romance with Liara is the most compelling, and held my attention and heart throughout the whole thing. With my female shepherd at least. Garrus and Tali come in second and third. Garrus because he's adorably awkward, and Tali because of the genuine emotion and drama surrounding her people. The only other romance I felt invested in was Kaidan's gay option in Mass Effect 3, which felt a lot more natural than the straight variation pushed on players since the first game. And even then it suffers from the game's overt focus on military chest-pounding, insert innuendo here, and the male shepherd's flat as a pancake delivery for most lines. As for Andromeda, I think they're just okay, with the plus side that there is a more accepting atmosphere overall. My favourites are Vetra, who is again adorable and slightly awkward, but is far more articulate about it, and Jarl, who is refreshingly emotional and heart-warming for a male romance character in a video game even of this period. Most of the others, even when they do something to mitigate character flaws like Gil, are not that impressive. It's the more tongue-in-cheek writing style working against the characters rather than for them. Okay, that's enough ranting about small details, so let's skip to the final bit of stuff and close out the episode. The next Mass Effect is in development, and while early teasers have shown Liara and hinted that Andromeda is being incorporated into the story, I'm not trusting these teasers. With both Mass Effect and Dragon Age, whole versions of a game's story have been scrapped repeatedly, forced gameplay changes have required story and world alterations, and there have been comprehensive rewrites shockingly close to release. Until this new Mass Effect game is released, out in the open, unable to be changed in a large way, I don't trust BioWare or Electronic Arts further than I can throw them. The next Mass Effect could become a character-based looter shooter. They could scrap Liara entirely. They could make Andromeda non-canon. The project could end up being cancelled or written off, dependent on whether or not BioWare is shuttered for some nebulous financial reason. Electronic Arts already seems to have wrapped up Dragon Age for good, hence my pessimism. Although the Veilguard does close off the narrative up to that point surprisingly well in my opinion, but that's another topic. I'll just finish with this. Mass Effect is a well-written, if conventional and trope-riddled piece of American military sci-fi. It uses games in an interesting way to tell a branching narrative, has some wonderfully written characters, created a compelling universe, and has potential even now. But it also suffers from tonal whiplash, forced storyline choices, skittish developers and publishers, and a combination of bloat and missing content. I'm a fan, but I also might be one of the harsher critics you'll find. But then, as I think others have said, if you truly love something, you can also tear it to pieces. Thank you for listening. If you like this episode, please check out other episodes of my podcast, and if you're on YouTube, other things I've done. I may have gotten a little heavy in some parts of this, and there are opinions that I'm sure will cause reactions, but this series is wont to make you think about things, and not always good things. This series meaning Mass Effect. If you enjoyed, then do like, share, and subscribe for more content that will come in the future. No guarantees when. So, ladies and gentlemen and everyone in between, see ya!